In Cedar Pines, Colorado, a 10-foot Santa statue appeared overnight. They should have noticed its eyes following them. I am the Nightmare Maestro, and tonight's tale will make you question every Christmas decoration that seems just a little too real. The December air in Cedar Pines carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, mingling with the sugary sweetness of holiday treats wafting from open windows. Lauren Brennan stood on her front porch, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of cocoa, admiring the transformation of Evergreen Circle into a winter wonderland. The setting sun painted the snow-laden branches in shades of amber and rose, while strands of twinkling lights began to sparkle against the deepening twilight. Every house competed in the annual Christmas crawl, their displays growing more elaborate each year. Animated reindeer, synchronized light shows, and hand-carved ice sculptures. But nothing compared to what had appeared at number 13. The house at the end of the cul-de-sac had been empty for a decade, until last week. The previous owners had vanished without explanation, leaving behind only whispered rumors and unanswered questions. No one had seen the new owner move in. The trucks came at night, their headlights cutting through the darkness like searching eyes. The only sign of life was the massive Santa Claus figure that now dominated the front yard, its installation as mysterious as its origin. Standing over 10 feet tall, it wore a crimson velvet suit trimmed with gold that seemed to shimmer even without light hitting it. The fabric moved subtly in ways that defied the wind, rippling like liquid mercury. Its beard appeared to be made of real hair, each strand moving independently in the Colorado wind, sometimes writhing like pale worms when no breeze stirred. But it was the eyes that drew Lauren's attention, piercing blue, with an impossible depth that made her feel like she was staring into frozen lakes. Within those crystalline orbs, she could swear she saw shadows moving, like desperate figures trying to break through thin ice. Lauren shivered, pulling her wool cardigan tighter. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees whenever she looked at the statue. As she watched, a crow landed on Santa's shoulder, preened for a moment, then fell dead into the snow. Its body was frozen solid. Her phone buzzed with a message from her friend Ralph. "Ready for tonight's crawl?" Lauren typed back a quick confirmation, trying to ignore the way Santa's head seemed to turn slightly toward her as she walked back inside. The movement was so subtle she could almost convince herself she'd imagined it. Almost. But when she glanced back through her window, the statue was definitely facing her house now. Its benevolent smile somehow transformed into something predatory in the gathering dusk. A small gift-wrapped package sat on her welcome mat. She hadn't noticed it before. The tag read simply, "You've been chosen." The paper was an unusual shade of red, like old blood, and seemed to pulse faintly in her hands. Lauren left it unopened on her kitchen counter, but throughout her preparations for the evening, she could swear she heard it whispering her name. The Christmas crawl was a cherished neighborhood tradition, where residents went door to door sampling holiday treats and voting on decorations. Lauren, Ralph, and their friends Emma and James gathered at dusk, their breaths visible in the frigid air. Emma brought her signature spiked eggnog in vintage glass bottles, the nutmeg-spiced warmth doing little to chase away the unnatural chill that had settled over Evergreen Circle. They saved the mysterious new house for last, making their way through displays that grew increasingly disturbing as the night wore on. The mechanical reindeer at number 7 suddenly jerked and twitched like seizure victims. The angelic choir display at number 10 sang in discordant whispers, every Mary and Jesus in the nativity scenes they passed, had turned their heads to watch their progress down the street. As they approached number 13, the Santa loomed larger than ever. The porch lights were off, but the figure seemed to glow from within, casting long shadows across the snow that moved independent of its source. The shadows formed shapes that looked almost like children playing, until you noticed their elongated limbs and two sharp fingers. When no one answered their knocks, Emma suggested taking selfies with the statue. The eggnog had made them bold, dulling their instincts that screamed to run. James positioned himself on the enormous lap while the others crowded around. The velvet felt warm and seemed to pulse beneath him, like sitting on something breathing. Lauren noticed small, dark stains on the white fur trim, old brownish spots that looked disturbingly like dried blood. The air temperature plummeted until their phones began to malfunction, screens flickering with strange symbols. The flash went off, and Emma screamed. "It moved! I swear it moved," she insisted, but the others laughed it off. Yet as they studied the photo later, huddled in Lauren's living room, something was definitely wrong. In the split second of the flash, Santa's hand appeared to be gripping James's shoulder with elongated fingers that ended in points, though now it rested naturally on the armrest of its throne. More disturbing were the faces visible in the shadows behind them. Dozens of pale, gaunt visages with black holes for eyes. Later that night, their phones chimed simultaneously despite being set to silent. An unknown number had sent them each the same message. "You sat on his lap. Now you've made the list." Below was an image, a scroll of yellowed parchment with their names written in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. The letters seemed to squirm and move on the screen, rearranging themselves into different configurations that spelled out descriptions of how they would die. Lauren tried to delete the message, but it kept reappearing. When she turned off her phone, the text appeared on her television, her laptop, even in the steam on her bathroom mirror. The last line changed with each appearance. "He knows when you're sleeping. He sees your nightmares. He's already inside." The next morning brought disturbing discoveries that defied explanation. Emma found her chimney filled with black ash that smelled of sulfur and decay. When she tried to clean it, she uncovered small bones with teeth marks on them. The ash seemed to move on its own, forming patterns that looked like screaming faces before dissolving back into formless soot. Ralph's carefully wrapped presents had been torn open, their contents replaced with coal that left oily stains on his carpet. The stains spread while he watched, forming symbols that made his eyes hurt to look at. When he tried to clean them, they seeped deeper into the floor, and he could hear something moving in the crawl space below, scratching and whispering his name in a voice that sounded like crackling flames. James discovered deep scratches on his bedroom door, as if made by massive claws. They spelled out "naughty" in jagged letters that wept a sticky red substance. His Christmas tree had transformed overnight. The ornaments were now tiny glass globes filled with what looked like moving shadows. Each one contained a different memory from his childhood, but twisted and wrong, focusing on moments of cruelty and fear. Lauren spent hours researching the house's history, her fingers trembling as she uncovered pattern after pattern. Every 10 years, like clockwork, someone new would move in just before Christmas. They'd erect an elaborate Santa decoration, and then people would vanish, always, 3 or 4 at a time, always during the holiday season. The police never found evidence of foul play, and eventually, the cases went cold. But in each instance, witnesses reported strange phenomena, unexplained noises, moving shadows, and the overwhelming sense of being watched. The most disturbing detail came from a newspaper article dated exactly 50 years ago. A child had captured a photo of the Santa statue in front of number 13. In the grainy black and white image, its head was turned at an impossible angle, and its mouth, visible behind the beard, was filled with rows of sharp teeth. The child who took the photo disappeared that night, leaving behind only a half-eaten candy cane that still retained the impression of tiny fingers. Lauren found similar photos from each decade, each showing the same statue in different locations. The dates of the photos matched perfectly with clusters of disappearances across the country. In every image, the statue's eyes seemed to stare directly at the viewer, and longer. She looked at them, the more she felt something looking back. They agreed to meet at Lauren's house to share their findings, but James never showed. Calls went straight to voicemail, each attempt rewarded with a different Christmas carol played backwards at half speed. His apartment was empty, except for sooty boot prints leading from the fireplace to his bedroom. Each footprint was impossibly large and seemed to smolder, leaving scorch marks that pulsed like dying embers. The temperature in his apartment dropped rapidly as they investigated. Their breath came out in clouds that formed words before dissipating. He's checking his list. Ice crystals spread across the windows in patterns that looked like desperate handprints. On his bed lay a small gift box wrapped in shimmering crimson paper that seemed to absorb all light around it. Lauren's hands shook as she lifted the lid. Inside was a Polaroid showing James frozen in terror, the Santa statue looming behind him. The timestamp showed it was taken just hours ago, but the setting appeared to be some kind of workshop with walls decorated in twisted wreaths made of hair and wire. The photo was still warm to the touch, and as they watched, James's expression changed slightly, his mouth opening wider in a silent scream. Hanging from hooks were stockings that looked suspiciously like human skin, each one monogrammed with the name of a missing person. The workshop benches were littered with tools that seemed better suited for a torture chamber than toy making. In one corner, a music box played a tinkling version of Silent Night, while clockwork dolls performed a jerky dance, their faces perfect replicas of missing children. Emma recognized other decorations in the photo's background. They matched descriptions from missing persons reports she'd found, spanning back 50 years. Each disappearance coincided with the arrival of a new neighbor and their Santa display. The most recent photo revealed a horrifying detail. In the workshop's corner, a fresh batch of stockings was being prepared. They bore their names, Lauren, Ralph, and Emma, returned to number 13, armed with flashlights and Emma's father's old revolver. The front door swung open at their touch, revealing a house that defied logic. The interior stretched far beyond what the building's exterior dimensions should allow, corridors twisting impossibly, and staircases leading to places that shouldn't exist. Every surface was covered in grotesque Christmas decorations that moved when viewed directly. Ornaments that looked like shrunken heads hung from hooks, their eyes following visitors' movements. Tinsel made of human hair, draped across blood-red walls, writhing like tentacles. The air smelled of peppermint and decay, with an underlying metallic tang that grew stronger as they ventured deeper. The temperature fluctuated wildly between freezing cold and sweltering heat. Windows showed different seasons, different times of day, different years, all featuring the same Santa statue watching from outside. Mirrors reflected versions of themselves from hours ago, walking down these same halls, making different choices. Some reflections showed them already dead. As they moved deeper into the house, they heard singing, a deep, otherworldly voice performing Christmas carols in a language that made their ears bleed. The words seemed to carry meaning that their minds refused to process, hinting at truths too terrible to comprehend. Following the sound led them to a massive workshop where time seemed to move differently. Workbenches lined with hideous toys stretched into darkness, each creation more nightmarish than the last. And there, in the center of it all, stood the Santa statue. Only it wasn't a statue anymore. Its crimson suit rippled like liquid, golden trim, glowing with inner fire. The beard writhed with a life of its own, revealing glimpses of a mouth that contained countless rows of needle-sharp teeth. Its eyes held the cold of infinite winters and the darkness between stars. As it turned to face them, they realized with horror that this was what had always lived in the space between belief and reality, feeding on faith and fear in equal measure. The thing that wore Santa's shape reached for them with hands that had too many joints, its holly red lips splitting into a smile that went all the way around its head. Behind it, James hung suspended in Christmas lights that pulsed in rhythm with his fading heartbeat, his skin already beginning to take on the texture of wrapping paper. Their bullets passed harmlessly through the crimson figure, leaving holes that sealed themselves with writhing threads of velvet. The thing that wasn't Santa spoke, its voice resonating from everywhere and nowhere at once, like sleigh bells wrapped in razor wire. "Your ancestors knew me better," it said, spreading arms that stretched impossibly long. "Before they sanitized my hunger into milk and cookies." Ancient memories flooded their minds, images of desperate villages and endless winters, of bargains struck with something that wore a bishop's robes stained red with sacrifice. Communities survived brutal winters by offering it their chosen ones, wrapped in festive paper and tied with ribbons made from their own hair. The thing had many names across many cultures, but it always came in red, and it always required tribute. Lauren found herself unable to move as the workshop's shadows coalesced around them. The toys on the workbenches began to stir, dolls with porcelain faces that cracked to reveal fanged maws, toy soldiers whose rifles fired real bullets, music boxes that played screams instead of carols. Each creation contained a piece of someone's soul, trapped in eternal torment for the thing's amusement. The scroll they'd seen in the photo materialized in the air before them, names writing themselves in fresh blood. "The list must be honored," the creature said, its beard parting to reveal the void behind its face. "Your modern world has forgotten the price of winter's mercy. But I remember. I always remember." Emma managed to reach James, her fingers brushing against the Christmas lights that held him. The contact sent electric agony through her body, showing her visions of everyone who had ever been taken. Centuries of victims, all preserved in the thing's twisted workshop, their essences powering its endless hunt for more names to add to its list. Ralph found the ancient scroll tucked into the thing's sleeve, while it was distracted by Emma's screams. The parchment felt alive in his hands, its surface rippling with countless names written in varying shades of red. As his lighter touched the scroll's edge, the creature's roar shook the workshop's foundations, making reality itself vibrate like a plucked string. But their victory evaporated as quickly as the scroll's ashes. The thing's laughter started softly, a gentle tinkling of bells that grew into a cacophony of breaking glass and cracking bones. Did you think it would be that simple? Its voice had changed, becoming a chorus of every child who had ever whispered their Christmas wishes into the dark. The ashes didn't dissipate. Instead, they swirled through the air like toxic snow, each flake burning cold enough to numb flesh. Lauren watched, transfixed, as the particles gathered before her, crystallizing into a small gift box wrapped in paper that matched the exact shade of her childhood bedroom walls. Her name appeared on the tag in her mother's handwriting, complete with the little heart she used to dot the I. When the box opened, Lauren felt something fundamental shift inside her mind. The scroll within was blank except for her name at the top, but as she held it, she began to see people differently. She could sense the weight of their secrets, the darkness they thought they'd buried. Every stranger's face became a potential entry, every passerby a possible addition to her growing collection. Emma and Ralph grabbed her arms, trying to pull her away, but their touch felt wrong now. Too warm, too alive. She saw the lies behind their concerned expressions. Emma's secret cruelty to neighborhood pets as a child, Ralph's carefully hidden pleasure in others' misfortunes. The scroll in her hands twitched eagerly, ready to record their names in her own blood. The list chooses its keeper carefully, the creature said, its form unraveling like a poorly knitted sweater to reveal the void beneath. It needs someone who understands that mercy and cruelty are two sides of the same coin. Someone who's always felt the weight of others' expectations, the pressure to perform seasonal joy. Who better than you, Lauren? Memories surfaced, but twisted now. Her father dressed as Santa, bringing presents while her mother lay dying in the hospital. The emptiness of each Christmas after. The growing resentment behind her perfect holiday decorations. The scroll began to fill with names, not just her friends, but neighbors whose cheerful celebrations had felt like personal attacks, colleagues whose holiday bonuses exceeded hers, every person who had ever made her feel like an outsider looking in at warmth she couldn't reach. She tried to drop the scroll, but it had become part of her, its parchment merging with her skin. Her veins ran with ink now, pumping new names through her heart. The transformation was subtle at first, a crystalline quality to her eyes, a slight elongation of her fingers, the way shadows began to curve toward her instead of away. "Stop fighting it," the thing whispered, its voice now harmonizing with her own thoughts. "You've always known this was coming. Why else would you feel so cold inside while others celebrated? You were meant to be part of something older than their plastic joy and electric lights." Emma and Ralph fled as the house began to collapse, but Lauren remained, watching her reflection fragment across hundreds of shattered ornaments. In each piece, she saw herself differently, past, present, and the terrible future spreading before her like fresh snow, waiting for footprints. The house vanished, leaving her standing alone in the winter night. The scroll had become a delicate golden watch on her wrist, each tick adding new names to her mental list. She found herself humming carols in that ancient, terrible language, understanding now that they were never songs of celebration, but hymns of hunger. Weeks later, a for sale sign appeared in front of Lauren's house. The neighbors whispered about her sudden decision to move, about the strange noises they'd heard at night. about the way their children refused to walk past her yard. No one connected her departure with the news reports of missing persons 2 towns over, where a mysterious figure had been seen admiring Christmas displays, marking certain houses for future visits. In her new neighborhood, Lauren's holiday decorations won immediate praise. The centerpiece was a stunning Santa statue, a bit smaller than the original, but crafted with incredible attention to detail. People particularly remarked on its eyes, so realistic, so full of depth, somehow familiar. And if they noticed how their children went quiet in its presence, how their pets refused to go near it, well, that was just part of the season's magic. Because winter's traditions must be maintained, the list must be honored. And now Lauren understands why Santa's laugh always carried a note of warning. If this tale sent chills down your spine, make sure to share it with fellow horror enthusiasts who appreciate a darker take on holiday traditions. Don't forget to subscribe to the Nightmare Maestro and hit that notification bell to ensure you never miss a chilling tale. Leave a comment below, sharing your own unsettling encounters with seemingly innocent Christmas decorations. After all, you never know which Santa might be watching.